The tablet feels cold in the conservator's gloved hands. It should not feel cold. The vault beneath the British Museum holds its air at a stable 20 degrees Celsius, a careful stillness designed to preserve clay glaze, inscription memory. And yet this particular tablet, catalogued as BM91873, seems to draw warmth out of the room around it. That is what unsettles her. Not because she believes the old explanations, not exactly, but because after 3 decades of handling Mesopotamian objects, she knows when an artifact resists becoming ordinary. Most tablets she lifts contain the familiar machinery of ancient civilization: grain accounts, land transfers, royal decrees, tax records, lists, inventories, the bureaucracy of one of the world's first literate cultures. But this one does not. The cuneiform signs pressed into its surface nearly 5,000 years ago do not speak of trade or tribute. They speak of beings the ancient scribes called Udug-hul, the evil ones. And this tablet is not alone. That is the first thing that must be understood, and then understood again. Not one tablet, not one story, not one imaginative flourish from an overheated priest or a frightened villager. There are hundreds, thousands. Amulets, incantations, ritual texts, protective plaques, lexical lists, medical tablets, mythological narratives. The archive is too large to dismiss easily, too precise to reduce comfortably, too methodical to resemble mere ornament. A demon head stares out from a glazed amulet. It is the face of Pazuzu, king of the wind demons, bringer of fever, spreader of plague. The expression is fixed, deliberate, severe. The British Museum holds examples. The Louvre holds examples. Yale holds examples. And they are not curiosities. They were worn, hung over thresholds, buried in foundations, placed near mothers in labor, given to families who believed that the image of one danger could hold another danger at bay, and that too must be sat with for a moment. These were not decorations. They were used carefully, used repeatedly, used across centuries. The details stay remarkably consistent: the wings, the scorpion tail, the taloned feet, the specific arrangement of the face, as though accuracy mattered, as though these were not inventions, but representations, as though the craftsman was expected to get something right. In 2011, the Suleymaniye Museum in Iraqi Kurdistan acquired a group of clay tablets, mostly ordinary records of administration and contract. But among them was one that did not belong to the ordinary order of things. Tablet T-1447, once translated, revealed previously unknown lines from Tablet 5 of the Epic of Gilgamesh, the section describing Humbaba, guardian of the cedar forest. The discovery did not simplify the story. It made it less stable, less comfortable, less easy to file under hero and villain. That is the larger pattern waiting beneath Mesopotamia's archive of shadows. The texts do not present monsters in the neat shape modern readers prefer. They do not sort beings cleanly into evil and good chaos, and order, threat, and protection. Again and again, the tablets return to a more difficult arrangement. A being may be feared and still be necessary. A being may be terrifying and still be appointed. A being may be fought in myth and invoked in ritual. A being may be destroyed in one text and preserved with almost bureaucratic precision in another. Why preserve such things so carefully? That question must not be rushed. It is the question that hangs over museum drawers and storage vaults, over excavation reports and translation tables, over every broken tablet fragment that still carries a demon's name. Why would the first literate civilization invest so much disciplined labor in documenting entities that did not matter? Why spend years training scribes to write the names of beings that pose no real danger? Why preserve technical procedures for threats that existed only in story? The modern word is mythology. The ancient impulse looks closer to record keeping. The Sumerian and Akkadian languages do not use a single blunt word where later translators say demon. They distinguish, they classify, they sort. Udug can refer to a spirit that is good or bad, depending on context. Udug Hul is the evil form. Udug Sig, the benevolent one. The distinction is not poetic, it is operational. The wrong classification would imply the wrong response. Then there are the Gala, the underworld demons. They serve Ereshkigal. They drag souls downward. They cannot be bribed. They cannot be softened. They cannot be turned aside by pity, because pity is not part of their function. They are described as beings without ordinary human appetites, without ordinary human vulnerabilities, existing only to fulfill the underworld's claim. And then the Aelu, the storm-associated demon, named in threat lists, alongside ghosts, evil gods, and other hostile beings. The incantation formulas repeat these categories in set sequences as though the order itself mattered, as though technical language was being maintained. Not casual fear, not decorative religion. A system. The old Babylonian exorcistic texts speak in procedural tones. May the evil Udug and the evil Gala stand aside. That sounds to modern ears like liturgy. But in the tablets, it also sounds like diagnosis. The categories matter because the countermeasures matter. One threat requires one response. Another requires something else. The vocabulary is not excessive, it is precise. And the names themselves are often descriptive. Pazuzu, the wind demon king. Lamashtu, the child killer. Asag, the stone demon. Namtar fate, the decree of death. The name tells you what the being does, what sphere it touches, what kind of danger it represents. This is not how a civilization writes when it is being vague. It is how a civilization writes when vagueness is dangerous. That may be the heart of it. That may be why the tablets feel less like stories and more like manuals. Categorize the threat, record the signs, preserve the procedure, copy the formula correctly, hand it down, do not lose the archive. Because what if naming something incorrectly meant failing to stop it? What if calling an Udug by the wrong kind of name was like misdiagnosing a disease? What if precision meant the difference between protection and exposure? The mainstream answer is that Mesopotamia produced an extraordinarily sophisticated symbolic language for suffering illness, fear, and misfortune. That answer is not foolish. It is careful, reasonable, earned. But the tablets themselves keep pressing another possibility. Not that the system was symbolic only, but that it was practical. That the scribes were not inventing a cosmos of danger for literary pleasure. They were documenting what they believed was there. The language of evil in ancient Mesopotamia is not loose, not dreamy, not careless. It is administrative. It is taxonomical. It is preserved with the patience of an archive. And once you see that, once you notice that the demon lists were copied with the same seriousness as king lists and city lists and trade lists, the next question arrives almost without warning. If these were archives, then what exactly did the Mesopotamians think they were archiving? That question leads slowly and uncomfortably to the cedar forest, to a guardian named Humbaba, and to the possibility that the first monster in this archive may never have been a monster at all. The cedar forest lies at the edge of desire. That is one way to approach Humbaba. Another is to begin where the tablets begin, with appointment with duty, with a being placed somewhere for a reason. The texts call him guardian. They also call him terrifying. They give him the face of a nightmare and the function of a gate. They place him in the cedar forest of Lebanon, in the dwelling of the gods, before trees too sacred to be approached casually, too significant to be taken without consequence. And so the question circles back, as it always does in Mesopotamian literature. Is Humbaba villain, or is Humbaba obstacle? Is he evil, or is he assigned? Is he a monster because he is monstrous, or because he stands between human ambition and what human ambition wants? Tablet 5 of the Epic of Gilgamesh gives him powers so extreme they almost resist interpretation. His voice is the flood. His mouth is fire. His breath is death. He can hear movement in the forest from an impossible distance. He was placed there by Enlil to terrify mortals, to keep them back, to make the forest impassable. That is the official function: guarding, deterring, enforcing boundary, not conquest, not predation, not random cruelty. The fragments complicate him further. His face is described as twisted, coiled, unsettling, to behold the kind of description modern readers place quickly in the category of the grotesque. But ancient texts often describe with the bluntness of witness rather than the elegance of metaphor. Something looked wrong. Something looked unnatural. Something looked like no ordinary face should look. And so the tablet records the wrongness directly. Then the newer lines from Suleymaniya arrive, and they do not rescue the old heroic certainty. They weaken it. Humbaba speaks. Humbaba argues. Humbaba pleads for his life. He offers surrender. In some versions, he offers service. He tells Gilgamesh that if he is spared, he will serve him cut timber, for him yield the resources of the forest under new terms. This matters. It matters because it changes the moral geometry of the scene. The guardian does not die in combat at the height of his aggression. He dies after asking not to die. Enkidu urges Gilgamesh to kill him anyway. The urgency is striking. Kill him now before Enlil learns what has happened. Kill him before the divine order can intervene. Kill him before the consequences can arrive. And Gilgamesh does. Humbaba's head is cut off. The forest is opened. The guardian is dead. If this were a simple heroic victory, the text would settle there. But it does not settle. It recoils. Enlil is furious. Not because Humbaba could not be defeated. Not because the forest could never be entered. The anger comes because the killing was unnecessary. The surrender was offered. The guardian had been appointed. The line had been crossed and then crossed again. And so, Humbaba's powers are not simply erased. They are redistributed into the natural world, parceled out to lions and mountains and forests, as if the function could not be abolished only dispersed. That detail matters. Again, it matters because Mesopotamian texts rarely waste administrative imagination. If Humbaba were only a villain, his destruction would solve the problem. Instead, the problem remains. The powers remain. Protection remains necessary. The office outlives the body. So what happened in the cedar forest? One reading common and intelligent sees ecological warning. Humbaba is the guardian of sacred nature. Gilgamesh and Enkidu are heroic only from the human side of the story. But from another angle, they are invaders, cutting timber, violating limits, killing the defender of a protected zone. That reading is compelling because the text itself supports it. The forest is sacred. The guardian is appointed. The heroes seek resource and fame. The gods punish. But the tablets can be read even more literally than that. What if Humbaba was exactly what the text says, a real guardian placed by real divine authority, protecting a real place whose access had to be controlled? Not symbol, not moral allegory, security. When read that way, his powers become coherent. He hears intrusions from far away because guards must detect approach before approach becomes penetration. He terrifies because deterrence is more efficient than combat. He does not roam outward, attacking settlements because his function is local, fixed, protective. Everything about him is calibrated toward defense. And Gilgamesh becomes something less comfortable than hero. Not villain, perhaps, but trespasser, boundary breaker, one who confuses desire with right. This is why the story lingers. This is why it was copied and recopied through centuries. It is not clean enough to flatter the human side of the tale. It documents not triumph, but transgression, not evil destroyed, but guardianship violated. And the punishment follows. Enkidu dreams of divine judgment. One of the two must die. The death of Humbaba is named among the crimes. The killing matters in heaven as much as in the forest. Enkidu then dies slowly, painfully over days. The tablets spend time on this. They insist on duration. They refuse quick punishment. The consequence unfolds like a sentence being carried out in public. He curses the road that led him there, curses the trap of civilization, curses the chain of events that brought him into friendship, into forest, into guilt. And so the question returns, not answered, but deepened. Was Humbaba monster or guardian, villain or victim? The tablets do not decide for us. They preserve the ambiguity because the ambiguity may be the point. Some beings become villains only when viewed from the side of those who wish to pass. That pattern appears elsewhere in the archive. Again and again, a guardian becomes a monster once desire meets resistance. A protector becomes evil once protection obstructs human will. It happens with Humbaba. It will happen again with powers even older, even stranger. Because in Mesopotamian memory, the line between guardian and threat is often not a line at all. It is a change of perspective. And once that thought enters the script, once it is allowed to remain there, it opens the door to another figure entirely. Anzu, the thief of destiny, who may have been criminal rebel or something more dangerous than either. Anzu steals more than an object. He steals procedure. He steals legitimacy. He steals the mechanism by which legitimacy becomes effective. That is why the myth matters and why it was preserved with such care. The tablets describe him as a lion-headed eagle or an eagle-headed lion, depending on the emphasis of the text and the imagination of the scribe. A storm being, a composite, a creature of courtly access and catastrophic betrayal. He serves in Enlil's circle. He is trusted enough to stand near divine authority. And then, when Enlil bathes, Anzu takes the Tablet of Destinies. What is the Tablet of Destinies? The answer cannot be hurried. It is not merely a record. It is not simply a list of outcomes. It is the instrument by which decrees become binding upon reality itself. Whoever holds it does not merely know fate. He can pronounce what must be. Divine speech becomes enforceable through it. Cosmic government rests in its possession. So when Anzu steals it, the crisis is immediate. The gods do not simply lose an heirloom. They lose command. Their words cease to carry force. Their authority becomes hollow. This is why the texts describe panic. The theft is not symbolic embarrassment. It is a coup. And again, the details are procedural. That is what is so unsettling. The myth does not drift into generality. It names the refusals. One god declines. Another refuses. Another still will not go. The reason is clear each time. How do you attack an enemy who now controls the rule by which attacks succeed? How do you fight someone who can decree that your weapon fails before it reaches him? Ninurta eventually accepts the task. Not because the danger is small, but because the danger is unbearable if left in place. Order itself hangs suspended, and yet when he enters battle, brute strength is not enough. He fires arrows. Anzu commands them to return to the reeds they came from, and they do. That image is one of the most revealing in the archive. Not because it is fantastic, but because it is so precise about the nature of power. The attack fails not from lack of force, but because reality has been administratively redirected. That is what the Mesopotamian texts understand so well. Power is not only violence. Power is office, instrument, rightful possession, procedure. Whoever controls the legitimate mechanism controls the world structured by that mechanism. The solution, therefore, must be tactical rather than merely forceful. In some versions, a strategy is suggested: strike in the instant between Anzu's commands. In others, attack the wings, disrupt his ability to speak the decrees clearly. In every version, the principle remains: a loophole must be found. The rightful order cannot simply overpower stolen legitimacy. It must outmaneuver it long enough to restore the instrument to the proper hand. Ninurta succeeds. Anzu falls. The tablet is recovered. Order returns. The official story is complete. But the silence around one thing is hard to ignore. Why did Anzu steal it? The tablets say what he did. They say what followed. They say who chased him, who refused, who prevailed, how order was restored. But motive, which Mesopotamian narrative often provides in abundance, remains strangely absent. Was he ambitious, angry, convinced? The cosmos required a different ruler, acting alone, acting in response to grievance. We are not told. That omission matters because it leaves a narrow but dangerous opening in the official version. If motive is absent, the event is preserved almost as record. Something happened. The instrument was taken. Crisis followed. Recovery was necessary. Why the thief acted may not have been known or may not have been included, because the function of the text was not to understand him, but to remember the vulnerability. This is one of the most unsettling threads in the whole archive. The gods can be breached. The center can be penetrated. Order is not self-securing. Even divine governance can be compromised from within by a trusted insider. The lesson is subversive, almost too subversive to preserve. And yet, it was preserved. The reliefs intensify the feeling. Ninurta, pursuing the winged thief, is carved not like fantasy, but like event. Figures, angles, weapons, labels, identification. The scene is fixed with the same visual confidence used elsewhere to depict campaigns' hunts and royal acts, as though to say this happened in the deep time of the gods, and it matters now because every regime, every order, every hierarchy remains only one breach away from crisis. Is Anzu villain, then? Certainly in the official narrative he is. He violates trust. He seizes what is not his. He destabilizes the cosmos. But because the motive is not given, because the texts document the theft more fully than the mind behind it, the moral frame never seals completely. He could be criminal. He could be rebel. He could be revolutionary. The archive does not let that possibility vanish. Perhaps that is why it endures. Perhaps that is why the myth was copied across 1,000 years and more, not because it offered reassurance, but because it preserved a troubling truth. Authority can be taken. Right order can be interrupted. Even what seems divinely secured may depend on fragile instruments held by vulnerable hands. And if that is true in heaven, what then of the earth below? What then of rivers, stone, heat, and the raw hostility of the material world? The archive turns there, next to a demon named Asag, whose very presence makes fish boil in the water. Asag is not merely an enemy. He is a condition of disorder. The Lugal-E presents him that way, though it never abandons the language of battle. He is demon-opponent force of wrongness. He gathers stone warriors. He dwells in the mountains in the Kur, the zone where mountain foreign land, underworld, and the edge of order begin to blur together. And wherever he asserts himself, the life systems of Mesopotamia begin to fail. Fish boil alive in the rivers. Water does not flow properly. The channels malfunction. The conditions on which civilization depends begin to turn hostile. That detail about the fish must be lingered over. It appears repeatedly. It is too specific to feel ornamental, too strange to feel casual. It is not just that Asag kills. It is that his existence alters environment. Proximity to him makes life impossible. Rivers cease to behave as rivers should behave. Something in the world's arrangement becomes unusable. And because Mesopotamian civilization was river civilization, because irrigation was not convenience, but survival, this is not local threat. It is existential threat. If the rivers fail, everything fails. The text belongs to temple liturgy. That matters. It was recited ceremonially, preserved ritually. The story was not stored as private literary amusement. It was part of sacred memory. And sacred memory here preserves not simply a duel, but a transformation. Ninurta does not only defeat Asag, he reorganizes the world afterward. The battle itself is extensive. The stone army is described not as a loose image, but as tactical reality. These are not human soldiers who panic, retreat, negotiate, or surrender. They are stones under hostile command. They must be broken, scattered, classified, dealt with individually. The combat reads at moments almost like engineering by mythic means. That is where the text becomes especially fascinating. After Ashig is defeated, Ninurta blesses some stones and curses others. He assigns use and non-use. He determines which kinds of stone will build grind-cut support and which will remain despised, unfitted, resistant. Out of victory comes mineral classification. Out of combat comes practical order. Modern scholarship often treats this as ideological myth, a narrative explaining why some stones are useful and others are not. That is fair. But the text can also be read the other way around. What if the practical knowledge is the core and the demon battle is the preserving frame? What if the civilization needed to remember which materials served which purposes and embedded that memory inside a sacred conflict dramatic enough to guarantee transmission? That possibility should not be dismissed too quickly. Early literate and oral cultures often store technical knowledge inside story. Story carries what tables alone might lose. Story makes memory durable, and the lugal is durable. The result is a strange double reading. On one level, Ninurta defeats a demon whose existence corrupts land and water. On another, the text remembers the ordering of geology into civilization. Stones are no longer just there, they are sorted, named, blessed for one use, rejected for another. The earth becomes administratively legible. The same is true of water. Ninurta is said to build from the defeated disorder itself barriers and structures that regulate flow. Again, the mythic and the practical overlap. Battle becomes damming. Victory becomes hydrology. Hostile environment becomes managed landscape. So who or what is Asag? He can be read as personified environmental chaos. As the name given to conditions the early Mesopotamians experienced as actively hostile, unstable geology, uncontrollable water, lethal heat, unworked stone. He can be read as a demon because demon language is how a civilization without modern geology gives agency to what repeatedly threatens it. But the tablets also preserve him as entity, not just metaphor. They give him malice, command opposition. They let him stand as more than weather, more than earth, more than accident. Perhaps that is because, for the Mesopotamians, those categories were not separate. Hostile environment and hostile agency were not different explanatory worlds. They were one world seen whole. This matters because modern readers often flatten ancient texts into either symbolic wisdom or childish literalism. Mesopotamia offers something more difficult. It offers a worldview in which rivers, mountains, stone, disease, and divine intention operate in continuity. To defeat the hostile force in the land is simultaneously to defeat a being, organize a material order, and restore the conditions of life. Again, the archive preserves procedure through narrative. Again, the villain turns out to be tied to foundational knowledge. Again, destruction is followed by classification, not simple erasure. Again, the text behaves less like fantasy and more like a record of what had to be overcome for civilization to exist. And that pattern widens in the next great battle. Because if Asig is the demon of hostile earth organized into usefulness, Tiamat is older than that, larger than that, more impossible than that. She is not the disruption within the world. She is the precondition before the world. And when the tablets describe her defeat, they do not say chaos disappeared. They say chaos became structure. Before order, there is Tiamat, not evil at first, not even enemy at first. Water, vastness, primordial salt, the deep before distinction. the mothering sea from which the younger gods emerge when salt and fresh water mingle. The Enuma Elish begins there, in that undivided condition before heaven and earth are separated, before law is established, before cosmic administration takes recognizable shape. That beginning matters because it already resists the easy story of good conquering evil. Tiamat is not introduced as villain. She is origin. She is older than the conflict. She is one of the conditions from which conflict itself becomes possible. The younger gods disturb the quiet. Their activity, their noise, their restless existence unsettles Apsu and Tiamat. Apsu decides they must be destroyed. Tiamat does not immediately agree. In fact, the text goes out of its way to preserve her reluctance. She resists the murderous impulse. She remains at least initially protective. Then Ea kills Apsu. That is the first decisive violence in the epic. And it does not come from Tiamat. It comes from the younger generation, striking upward, eliminating an elder source. That detail is essential because everything that follows occurs in the shadow of this act. Tiamat is pressured, persuaded, mobilized into vengeance. She does not begin as destroyer. She becomes destroyer after a prior killing has already occurred. Then the transformation comes. She takes Kingu as consort. She gives him the Tablet of Destinies. She raises an army, 11 monsters named and enumerated with the same almost bureaucratic comprehensiveness found elsewhere in Mesopotamian texts. Serpents, dragons, scorpion men, storm beings, fish men, bull men, great lions, maddened diz. Each creature holds a category of threat. Poison, ferocity, intelligence joined to predation. Chaos in multiple forms. This list matters for the same reason all Mesopotamian lists matter. It is not vague. It is not decorative overflow. It is systematic. Chaos is being cataloged. The younger gods are terrified. They do not rush heroically toward battle. One refuses. Another cannot do it. Another will not attempt it. The scale of the threat is too great because the threat is not merely military. If Tiamat prevails, distinction itself dissolves. The world returns to undivided beginning. Structure fails. Form unforms. Then Marduk offers himself, and he does so politically. He will fight, yes, but only if victory makes him supreme. The assembly agrees. Emergency becomes coronation. Crisis authorizes permanent rule. Even here, the tablets are attentive to procedure. Kingship is negotiated before battle. Legitimacy must be granted in advance if triumph is to hold afterward. The combat is famous because it is both violent and administrative. Marduk traps Tiamat with winds, forces her mouth open, fills her so she cannot close, then shoots the fatal arrow through her. She dies. But her death is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of ordered reality. He splits her body. From one half he forms the sky. From the other the earth. Her eyes become sources of the rivers. Her body becomes architecture. Her corpse becomes cosmos. This is one of the darkest creation logics in human religious literature. The world is not made from nothing. It is made from killed chaos. Creation is not pure beginning. It is dismemberment turned into order. And that means chaos is not gone. It is everywhere. The sky above the earth, below the rivers themselves, all are reorganized Tiamat. She is defeated, yes, but she remains as substance. The world is made of what was conquered. Order is therefore not the replacement of chaos. It is chaos held in shape. The implications are difficult and worth returning to. If the material of reality is the body of primordial disorder, then stability is never final. It must be maintained. Authority is not ornamental in such a universe. It is structural. Divine kingship does not merely reign over a finished world. It actively prevents the world from remembering what it once was. This is why the Enuma Elish could function as New Year recitation. The victory is not once and done. It must be remembered because it is in a sense ongoing. Creation continues as maintenance. Order continues as imposed arrangement. Tiamat continues as the substance arranged. And again, the villain is not simple. She is avenger as much as aggressor, mother as much as monster, primordial condition as much as antagonist. The text could have erased her complexity if it wished. It does not. It keeps the memory of her initial reluctance. It keeps the context of Apsu's death. It preserves enough to prevent the moral frame from becoming entirely comfortable. Even her monsters are later repurposed. Some become protective beings. In later Mesopotamian iconography, forces once aligned with chaos can be redirected into order. That detail echoes Asag's defeat, Humbaba's redistributed powers, the larger archive's refusal to believe that destruction simply removes a thing from reality. More often, a hostile force is reorganized. So, what is Tiamat's symbol of entropy? Memory of sea and flood. Theological personification of undifferentiated existence. Yes, any of these. But to the Mesopotamians, she also appears as event-bearing entity, the being whose defeat made the current world livable. And if that is true, if the world itself is the corpse of conquered chaos, then another truth follows quietly behind it. Evil is not always outside. Danger is not always elsewhere. Sometimes the threat remains in the foundations, waiting only for authority to weaken. That thought leads naturally into the underworld. Not because the underworld is older than Tiamat, but because it is the place where order turns coldest, most bureaucratic, most absolute. And there, ruling dust and clay, without pity and perhaps without malice, is Ereshkigal. Ereshkigal does not rage in the way modern villains rage. She does not stalk through the text in theatrical cruelty. She does not savor pain. She administers. That is what makes her so difficult to escape imaginatively, and perhaps so difficult to classify. She is queen of the underworld, of the land of no return, the place where the dead eat dust and drink muddy water. Her power is total, not because she dominates through spectacle, but because her realm runs on procedure. The descent of Inanna shows this with shocking clarity. Inanna arrives at the gates below demanding entry. Whether she comes for funeral rites, for ambition, for expansion of sovereignty, the motives remain layered. But Ereshkigal's response is immediate and formal. Open the gates one by one. Strip her at each. Remove crown rod jewels, breastplate robe. Let no power enter intact. This is not improvisation. It is protocol. The underworld does not merely defeat those who descend. It processes them. By the time Inanna reaches the throne room, she is not the goddess of love and war in her fullness. She is disrobed, disarmed, administratively reduced. Then judgment comes. The Anunnaki judge. Ereshkigal fixes the eye of death upon her. Inanna is killed and hung on a hook. The speed of it is terrifying. No long speech, no final plea, no dramatic contest, simply the execution of underworld law. The text feels almost colder because of this. Ereshkigal is not hunting. She is functioning. That may be the central difficulty with her. She is death, not as event, but as institution. Her realm is not chaos. It is governance. Gates, judges, viziers, collectors, terms, substitution. There is no disorder in Erkala. There is too much order. The kind of order from which mercy has been removed because mercy would compromise the boundary itself. This is why the gala demons matter. They do not return from a failed collection. If someone is to come back from the underworld, someone else must take the place. The arithmetic must balance. The underworld cannot be emptied by sympathy. It cannot be softened by status. Inanna herself proves this. Divine beauty, rank force, none of it exempts her. And here again, the tablets preserve an ambiguity they might easily have omitted. Ereshkigal is not always presented as choosing her office freely. In some traditions, she is assigned to the underworld, exiled there, bound there. She rules absolutely, but also remains imprisoned within that rule. Unlike other deities who move between zones of the cosmos, she is largely fixed. Her queenship is also confinement. That makes her less simple than a villain and more tragic than a tyrant. She is the sovereign of death, yes, but perhaps also its captive. The Nergal traditions deepen the ambiguity. In some versions, Nergal descends and overpowers her. In others, she desires him. In still others, negotiation and threat intertwine. What remains consistent is her isolation, and the possibility that isolation distorts even divine rule. At one point, she threatens to release the dead if she is denied what she seeks. That threat is extraordinary. It implies she can rupture the most absolute boundary in Mesopotamian cosmology if sufficiently provoked. And still, most of the time, she does not. Most of the time, she holds the line. The same strictness governs Inanna's release. She may return, but not for nothing. Someone must replace her. The gala come upward to collect the substitute. Dumuzi is taken. The accounting is satisfied. Seasonal versions soften the finality by introducing alternation, but the principle never changes. Death negotiates only by transfer, never by cancellation. This is where Namtar enters the frame, though his full weight belongs a little later. He is Ereshkigal's messenger, vizier, executor. His name means fate. He carries decree into illness, into mortal timing, into the logistics of death. Together, they make the underworld feel not infernal, but administrative. Death is a government. That matters because it shifts the moral question. Is Ereshkigal evil, or is she simply the official charged with maintaining the one boundary the cosmos cannot survive without? If the dead return freely, if the distinction collapses, if death becomes optional, then order dissolves in another way. Her hardness may be what keeps the world above from becoming impossible. The Mesopotamians seem to have understood this. They feared her certainly. They did not speak of her lightly, but they also acknowledged her necessity. Some powers are not loved, not worshipped for kindness, not approached for blessing. They are recognized because they cannot be denied. That is why she is so haunting. You cannot defeat her. You cannot outlast her. You cannot flatter her into nullifying her office. At most, you delay becoming her subject. And every human being, no matter how protected elsewhere, in the archive ends beneath her administration, eventually. So she becomes one of the archive's strangest villains. Not malicious, not merciful, not avoidable. The darkness at the end of all stories, sustained by rules as rigid as stone. And yet, even in a world where death is administered so coldly, there remains another terror more intimate than the grave itself. A terror aimed not at the old, not at kings, not at heroes, but at infants, at pregnant women, at the beginning of life, before it can properly begin. The tablets call her Lamashtu, and they describe her with a clarity so focused it almost feels like witness. Lamashtu is one of the few figures in the archive whose violence is not morally ambiguous. That does not mean she is simple. Mesopotamian beings are rarely simple. But unlike Humbaba, unlike Tiamat, unlike even Ereshkigal, Lamashtu is described with a directness that leaves very little room for softening. She comes for children. She attacks pregnant women. She causes miscarriage. She dries up milk. She brings fever convulsions, wasting nightmare. Her target is specific and repeated the vulnerable at the threshold of life. The tablets and plaques describing her are numerous and widespread. This is not isolated fear. It is civilization-wide fear. The British Museum, the Louvre, Yale, and other collections preserve incantations, amulets, ritual objects, protective images, all dedicated in one way or another to warding her off. When a threat generates that much material culture across so much time, something profound is being documented, whether external entity, social terror, or both. Her appearance is assembled from threat signs: lion head, donkey ears and teeth, bird talons, snakes in the hands, sometimes a hairy body, sometimes shown nursing pig and dog, not human children turning motherhood into grotesque parody. It is one of the most disturbing visual programs in Mesopotamian iconography because it does not merely show danger, it shows inversion, the wrong thing nurturing the wrong life. That matters because Lamashtu is not only death, she is anti-motherhood, anti-birth, anti-continuity. The texts are procedural in describing her methods. She touches the pregnant belly 7 times. She snatches the infant from the nurse. She enters the house. She hovers around the bed. She afflicts the newborn. Again and again, the descriptions return to bodies that in the ancient world were frighteningly vulnerable. Pregnancy was perilous. Childbirth was perilous. Infancy was perilous. The first months of life balanced over an abyss. Modern scholarship rightly notes that Lamashtu can be read as the personification of infant mortality and maternal danger in a world without antisepsis antibiotics, neonatal care, or modern obstetrics. That reading is compassionate and probably inescapably true at one level. Human beings naming the thing that keeps killing their children is one of the oldest acts of resistance there is. But the tablets do not describe her as abstraction. They describe her as a daughter of Anu, divine by birth, and monstrous in intention, rejected by other powers hostile to gods and humans alike. She is not random. She chooses. She prays. She aims suffering where it will hurt most. That intention matters. A plague may be tragic without being malicious. Lamashtu is presented as malicious. The difference is enormous. Why children? The texts imply revenge and displacement, shut out of divine order, unable to strike effectively at those above her. She wounds through the most unbearable route available. She harms what humans love most. She turns mortal families into the medium of immortal spite. This gives her not only danger, but strategy. And the defensive system built around her is correspondingly elaborate. There are plaques. There are lengthy incantations. There are ritual formulas recited at specific times and under specific conditions. There are amulets hung over beds and doors. There are invocations of powers strong enough or opposed enough to force her away. Most notable among these powers is Pazuzu. This is one of the archive's great paradoxes, and it must not be rushed past. Pazuzu is not benevolent. He is not secretly redeemed by his protective role. The texts remain clear. He is a demon king, bearer of plague, lord of evil winds. He is malevolent. He is feared. And yet he is repeatedly invoked to defend mothers and infants from Lamashtu. The logic is not moral, it is strategic. Pazuzu hates Lamashtu, or Lamashtu fears Pazuzu. The deeper reason is not preserved clearly enough for us to know. The relationship simply appears in the archive as fact. And so, women wore Pazuzu amulets. Families displayed his image. His demon face entered the birthroom because one danger was preferable to another, or because one danger naturally opposed another. This is the Mesopotamian worldview at its most difficult and perhaps most mature. Protection does not necessarily come from goodness. Sometimes it comes from conflict among hostile powers. Sometimes survival depends not on summoning purity, but on understanding enmity. That is not how later religious imagination often wants to work. We want clean categories. We want the protector to be safe. The Mesopotamians do not always permit that comfort. They depict a reality where evil can be turned against evil, where the enemy of your enemy is not your friend, but may still be your necessary shield for one terrible night. And the objects themselves preserve the conviction that this was not theory. These amulets were made by the hundreds because people believed they worked. Not vaguely, not emotionally, practically. Protection was expected from correct image, correct words, correct placement, correct invocation. Did it work? Measured scientifically. No amulet prevents infection or birth trauma. Modern medicine explains most of the conditions that once devoured infants. But the tablets are not written from within modern medicine. They are written from within a world where causation was experienced through agency, where the child's sudden illness had a face and a name and a ritual answer. That answer mattered because helplessness is nearly unendurable. And in the Mesopotamian system, helplessness was fought with procedure. Lamashtu then becomes more than a demon. She becomes a record of concentrated parental terror, of civilizations watching children die and refusing to let the event remain nameless. She is what ancient grief looked like when pressed into clay. And beside her, looming in paradox, stands Pazuzu, the plague king, whose image might save the newborn from the child killer, even while reminding everyone in the room that protection itself had teeth. That paradox deserves its own space, because once Pazuzu enters fully, another figure waits in the same dark administrative world as Ereshkigal Namtar, the cutter of fate, who commands the 60 diseases. Pazuzu protects by remaining dangerous. That point must be repeated, because it is the center of his strangeness. He is not a softened demon, not a rehabilitated monster, not a misunderstood guardian. He is king of the evil wind demons. The inscriptions say so. The iconography insists on it. He carries plague-bearing winds from the desert. He spreads fever. He belongs among the threats the Mesopotamians feared, and yet his head hangs in houses. His bronze body, winged and taloned and scorpion-tailed, is fashioned with care and worn as defense. The same civilization that classified him among malevolent powers crafted his likeness into personal protection. Why? Because Lamashtu flees before him. Because one terror checks another. Because in a world structured by competing agencies, it may be possible to survive, not by abolishing danger, but by redirecting it. This is a system of relationships, not absolutes. Pazuzu is useful only within a narrow and specific jurisdiction. He is not invoked against every evil. He is not a universal protector. He is called especially against Lamashtu, especially around childbirth and infancy, especially where his rivalry matters. That specificity reveals the sophistication of the system. Protection is not generic. It is targeted. Again, the archive behaves less like devotional improvisation and more like technical literature. Correct threat, correct counterforce, correct procedure. Some of the inscriptions are almost declarative. I am Pazuzu, son of Hanpa, king of the evil wind demons. Identity, authority, sphere of command. The amulet does not merely depict. It establishes presence. It states capability. It functions like a credential carried into the room. Theologically, this is unsettling. Modern moral instincts resist the idea that the household might need a plague demon at its threshold. But the Mesopotamian household facing miscarriage, stillbirth, fever, convulsion, or infant wasting may have understood the matter differently. Better a dangerous ally with a defined enmity than no ally at all. This calculus appears elsewhere in the archive, but nowhere more starkly than here. The mother protects the child by placing another threat nearby. The birth room becomes a negotiated space among powers, not a sanctuary free from them. And if Pazuzu governs one domain of illness-bearing wind, Namtar governs another layer entirely. Not a single disease, not a single attack, but the complete deployment of mortality through illness. His name means fate, to cut fate, to determine, to finalize. He serves the underworld. In many texts, he stands as vizier of Ereshkigal, her messenger above ground, the one who carries decree into flesh. He is said to command 60 diseases. Not many, not countless. 60. The number matters because Mesopotamian mathematics is sexagesimal. 60 suggests total inventory completeness, the full set. So, when the texts say Namtar commands 60 diseases, they suggest not poetic exaggeration, but a comprehensive catalog of fatal affliction. Every way the body may be brought toward death through sickness lies under his administration. This is where Mesopotamian medicine becomes especially revealing. The civilization recognized that diseases differed, symptoms differed, treatments differed. Some illnesses burned hot, some wasted slowly, some seized the limbs, some clouded the mind. The medical corpus records distinctions carefully, and the theological framework mirrors that care. Disease is not one thing, it is many things. Diverse, specific, taxonomized. In that world, Namtar is not simply death in a vague sense. He is administrator of disease plurality. He sends one affliction here, another there, according to decree. Some texts present the diseases almost as subordinate demons in their own right, each with its own effect, all under his command. This is not primitive confusion. It is an organized attempt to understand why illness differs, why treatment sometimes fails, why some recover and others do not. The physician may know herbs, compresses, oils, observations. The exorcist may know incantations, petitions, ritual purification. Both act because both levels of causation are presumed real. Natural remedy and supernatural appeal are not rivals. They are partners. That is crucial. The Mesopotamians did not see medicine and theology as separate systems awkwardly forced together. They saw one reality requiring multiple forms of response. A fever may need cooling herbs and also the removal of the afflicting power. A wasting disease may require food ritual and divine appeal simultaneously. Treatment is layered because causation is layered. Namtar enters when the illness is not merely present, but appointed. That is the darker implication. Some diseases can be driven off. Some can be negotiated around. But if Namtar has been sent under decree from the underworld, then treatment meets a harder wall. Recovery may fail, not because the healer is incompetent, but because fate has already been cut. This is where his horror lies. He is not capricious, not enraged, not even especially personal. He is official. And because he is official, he becomes harder to bargain with. He does not kill from appetite. He implements from assignment. The incantations addressing him reflect this. They ask for delay, mercy, reconsideration, redirection. They invoke higher powers, hoping a decree may be softened or reversed before completion. Sometimes the texts imply such efforts work. Sometimes they do not. The archive preserves both the attempt and the inevitability. That makes Namtar one of the archive's purest examples of villainy without malice. He is terrible because he is necessary within the system. To abolish him would be to abolish the reliable passage from life to death. To accept him is to live knowing that all cures fail eventually. And from there, from wind-borne plague, from child-killing threat, from the 60 diseases that complete mortality's inventory, the archive descends even further into the places beneath the ground, into springs and wells and the hidden waters below civilization, into the domain called Kur, where boundary itself begins to take serpentine form. Kur is one of those ancient words that refuses to stay still. Mountain, foreign land, underworld, serpentine depth. The farther one follows it into Mesopotamian thought, the less it behaves like a single thing, and the more it begins to resemble a zone where categories loosen. That may be the point. Kur marks edges, places where the ordered surface world gives way to something older, less governed, less accessible. Sometimes the term refers to the underworld itself, sometimes to mountains beyond civilization, sometimes to a dragon-like or serpent-like power associated with the deep. The cuneiform sign suggests mountain, which already says something important. For the Mesopotamians, mountains were not simply elevation. They were the border of the known and the entry to otherness. They were where gods dwelled, where foreigners came from, where hidden waters and the lower realms touched the visible world. In mythic fragments, Kher can appear as opponent, as depth, as realm, as force. It is linked with underground waters, with the Abzu, with what lies beneath irrigation and river surface, and cultivated soil. That connection matters because Mesopotamian civilization depended not only on rivers seen from above, but on water rising from below through springs, wells, seepage, hidden channels. The under-earth was not empty, it was active. And to a people who could observe this activity without modern geology, it would have seemed entirely reasonable that such water belonged to a domain and such a domain to a power. So Kher becomes serpent or dragon, not merely because dragons are dramatic, but because serpents already seemed like creatures of the below. They emerge from holes. They move between concealment and surface. They are cold, old-looking, difficult to classify by ordinary familiar standards. The serpent is a natural image for the under-earth crossing upward. The important thing here is not whether Kher was one being or several related ideas. The important thing is that Mesopotamian texts preserve an attitude of caution toward what lies beneath. Underground water is life-giving, yes, but it is also dangerous, hidden, needing respect. Wells and springs connect not just to physical necessity, but to powers older than surface order. This matters because it shows again how the archive works. It does not separate engineering from theology. Water management required both. The canal had to be measured, and the realm beneath had to be acknowledged. The civilization's great practical achievements did not abolish the sacred and dangerous character of the materials they depended on. Some powers are not fought like Asag or Tiamat. Some are not defeated at all. They are approached carefully because they are fundamental. Kher belongs to that category. Not a villain in the theatrical sense, but a dangerous depth that cannot be humanized fully and therefore cannot be controlled by the categories humans prefer. And from those deep and hidden powers, the archive turns back toward a more intimate threat. Once again, the human witch, the one hidden inside community, rather than outside it. If the demon is one kind of danger, the witch is another. Harder in some ways because she is not monstrous at first sight. She is unseen until named. The Maklu series burning is Mesopotamia's most extensive anti-witchcraft ritual corpus. 8 tablets of incantations and a ritual tablet, all devoted to countering curses cast by male and female witches. The setting is night. That detail matters. Night belongs to heightened danger. Demons and hidden powers are more active. Witchcraft belongs to darkness, secrecy, indirect attack. So the counter-ritual meets the threat in its own hour. The procedures are elaborate. Figurines are made to stand in for the witch and the witch's apparatus. Materials are specified. Water sources specified. Plants specified. Timing specified. The cursed person participates alongside a ritual specialist. This is not vague supplication. It is a tightly controlled operation, and the language is strikingly aggressive. May the evil planned return upon its source. May the curse be poured back onto the witch's own head. May fire consume what was fashioned to harm. The logic is reversal. not mere shielding, but redirection. The attack is made to recoil upon the attacker. This is sympathetic magic in its clearest Mesopotamian form. Burn the figurine, burn the power. Dissolve the form, dissolve the curse. Bury the representation, imprison the harmful intent. Everything hinges on correspondence between object and target. Whether actual witchcraft existed in the modern sense is less important, at least initially, than recognizing how fully the civilization treated it as actionable threat. The texts do not speak hypothetically. They presume the witch is real, the curse real, the procedures necessary. That certainty has consequences. It means the anti-witchcraft rituals do not spend much time worrying about mistaken accusation. They assume identification. They assume guilt. That is troubling to modern readers, and it should be. Hidden evil within the community is always a dangerous category because it legitimizes retaliatory violence under the sign of defense. But the archive preserves the fear so clearly that it cannot be dismissed. When illness, bad luck, social fracture, and unexplained decline needed a human cause, witchcraft named one. And once named, the threat could be ritualized into something that might be answered. Night, fire, incantation, effigy, reversal. The witch is terrifying not because she is stronger than the demon, but because she is nearer. She knows the household, knows the wound, knows where to send the hidden thing. That intimacy makes the Maklu texts feel almost paranoid in their precision. The danger is social before it is supernatural. So the archive preserves a world surrounded by hostile powers from all sides, from the sky, from the underworld, from the desert, winds from the bedside, from the community itself, from the deep beneath the earth. And yet, it also preserves another category entirely. Not threat, not exactly. Not protection, not exactly. The seven sages, the Apkallu, beings who brought civilization and perhaps crossed lines that should not have been crossed. The Apkallu do not fit comfortably anywhere. That is why they matter. They are sages, culture heroes, bearers of essential knowledge. They are connected to Enki, to the deep freshwater wisdom of the Abzu, to pre-flood kingship, and the founding of civilization itself. The traditions remember 7 of them, each paired with an ancient ruler, each involved in bringing some decisive element of order into human life: ritual, writing, construction law, craft, calculation, understanding. Without them, the later tradition suggests civilization, as Mesopotamia knew, it would not exist. That alone would seem to place them firmly among benefactors. And yet the archive does not leave them there. They are also uncanny, sometimes fish-cloaked, sometimes winged, sometimes represented in ways that blur the line between sage and protective demon. Their forms are not purely human. Their origins are not purely human. They come from the depths, from before the flood. From a time when divine and mortal boundaries were more permeable, perhaps dangerously so. This is where their ambiguity deepens. Knowledge is gift, yes, but knowledge is also risk. The Apkallu teach what makes civilization possible, but that same teaching gives humans powers once reserved for the gods or for intermediary beings close to them. To teach writing is to teach memory beyond the body. To teach ritual is to teach access. To teach divination is to teach reading of cosmic signs. To teach building and law is to create durable order where only vulnerability once stood. These are blessings, but they are destabilizing blessings. Later, Near Eastern traditions will sharpen this tension into stories of forbidden knowledge, descending from semi-divine beings to humanity with punishment following boundary violation. Mesopotamia preserves the earlier form of the tension, and that form is more troubling because it does not resolve cleanly into condemnation. The Apkallu are not simply fallen. They are not simply holy. They are necessary and dangerous. Some texts hint at their removal, at their being sent down to the Abzu, at a loss of direct access to the original fullness of their wisdom. That reads like punishment or precaution or both. The implication is that some form of knowledge transfer once occurred more directly than it should have, and that the world after the flood no longer permits that immediacy. This creates a mythology of distance. The earliest wisdom was greatest, closest to source, closest to divine depth. What came later was transmission copying commentary reduced inheritance. Scribes preserve, priests preserve, scholars preserve, but the original giving belongs to a dangerous earlier time. Again, the flood hovers behind the issue. Mesopotamian flood traditions do not emerge from nowhere. Humanity becomes excessive, noisy, destabilizing. Divine patience thins. Catastrophe comes. One human is warned. Survival is permitted. And behind that survival lies wisdom. The kind of wisdom needed to build, preserve, continue. The same deep source that gave civilization also helps preserve it through destruction. This is why the Apkallu feel so modern in their problem. They stand for the possibility that what elevates humanity may also endanger it. That capability is never neutral, that a gift can destabilize the order into which it is given. The archive preserves this without deciding whether that makes the giver villainous or benevolent. Perhaps both. Perhaps the most dangerous gifts are the necessary ones. Their images were often buried in foundations placed at thresholds hidden within walls to protect buildings. That alone tells us something else. The beings of dangerous wisdom could still serve as guardians. Again, the Mesopotamian world refuses clean partitions. The uncanny can protect. The monstrous can preserve. The one who crossed boundaries can defend the boundary once crossed. And that returns us almost quietly to the deepest question of the whole archive. Why document all this? Why preserve with such tenacity a cosmos populated by beings who shift between enemy protector, victim, administrator, teacher, and threat? Because perhaps the Mesopotamians did not believe ambiguity meant unreality. Perhaps ambiguity meant reality was more exacting than moral simplicity allows. The world could contain a plague demon who protected mothers, a guardian mistaken for a monster, a chaos mother whose body became the world, a queen of death who was also captive of her office sages, who saved civilization by giving it dangerous things. That is not primitive thought. That is difficult thought, sustained thought, thought recorded patiently in clay. And so by the time we return to the museum vault, to the tablet drawer, sliding shut, the question is no longer simply whether these beings were real. The more unsettling question is what kind of civilization commits 3 millennia of literacy to preserving them, unless the preservation itself was considered necessary. The archive answers not with philosophy first, but with persistence. Copy it, store it, learn it, use it. Do not lose the names. Do not lose the procedures. Do not lose the distinctions. And in that persistence, the tablets begin to resemble something larger than mythology. They begin to resemble a survival system. The conservator closes one drawer and opens another. That is how the archive continues. Not as one dramatic revelation, but as repetition. Tablet after tablet, fragment after fragment, incantation beside lexical list, beside medical diagnosis, beside mythic precedent. The archive of shadows is not a single narrative. It is a bureaucracy of fear and defense. That may be the most important thing to say, and then to say again. Ancient Mesopotamia did not preserve demon knowledge casually. It preserved it administratively. The myths establish precedent. They show what the gods did when confronted by primordial threats. Marduk defeats Tiamat. Ninurta defeats Asag. Ninurta recovers order from Anzu's theft. These stories are not idle. They are constitutional. They explain how authority was won, how disorder was checked, how structure became possible. They create the pattern by which later ritual can claim legitimacy. The incantation tablets then operationalize that pattern. They do not merely retell, they instruct. Name the threatening power, invoke the opposing authority, use the correct formula, observe the correct sequence. Some rituals specify time of day, some specify materials, some specify posture, placement, gesture, offering. It is difficult to read them honestly and still say they were written without expectation of effect. The medical texts deepen the system. They note symptoms. They prescribe herbs, washes, poultices, regimens, and alongside those, they preserve petitions, exorcisms, anti-demonic formulas. Again, the modern mind often wants to separate the practical from the theological. The tablets do not. To them, both belong to the same world. A body may be inflamed materially and assaulted supernaturally at once. Treatment, therefore, proceeds on both levels. The anti-witchcraft texts show the same structure in a different register. Hidden human malice must be met with exposed ritual counteraction. Effigy, fire, spoken reversal, divine witness. Procedure, always procedure. And then there are the amulets, tangible, portable, intimate. The household version of the archive, what the tablet stores and writing the amulet stores in image and presence. Pazuzu hung near the bed. Protective plaques placed where danger is expected to cross. Objects as condensed theology as condensed defense. Once all of this is seen together, the original question sharpens. Why would literacy, this rare, this expensive, this elite, be used so heavily for this material? Unless the material mattered at the level of survival, clay was available, yes. But literacy was not. Scribal training took years. Cuneiform was complicated. To write at all was to participate in one of the most resource-intensive cultural systems of the ancient world. That system could have devoted itself overwhelmingly to kingship trade law and administration alone. Instead, it also devoted itself over and over to the cataloging of danger beyond the merely human. That does not prove demons existed in a modern objective sense. The archive cannot prove that, but it does prove priority. It proves conviction. It proves that the people maintaining these records considered them worth preserving with the same seriousness they brought to every other vital function of civilization. That alone should slow us down. Modern interpretation usually offers two safe endings. One says these texts preserve symbolic language for natural events and psychological fears. The other says they preserve obsolete superstition. Both may contain truth, but neither fully explains the archive's texture. Neither fully explains the technical precision, the layered specificity, the centuries-long consistency, the confidence with which procedure is handed down. The tablets behave as though correct naming matters because correct naming is effective. They behave as though wrong categorization can fail dangerously. They behave as though the world is filled with distinct agencies, and that survival depends on knowing which is which. Perhaps that was mistaken. Perhaps it was a brilliantly organized response to misunderstood causes, a civilization without germ theory, without tectonics, without modern psychiatry, without obstetrics or epidemiology, building the best explanatory and protective framework available from the evidence available to it that is entirely possible. But the archive leaves another possibility standing, and that possibility is what gives it its lingering charge. Perhaps the Mesopotamians were documenting something they genuinely encountered, not only inwardly, not only symbolically, but as features of reality as they understood and experienced it. Perhaps their worldview included entities and agencies, modern frameworks, exclude by principle rather than by disproof. The archive cannot settle that. It can only preserve the tension. And perhaps that is enough, because the preservation itself becomes the message. They did not want the names lost. They did not want the procedures forgotten. They did not want the distinctions between Udug Gala witchcraft, child killer, underworld, decree, and primordial chaos to blur into one shapeless fear. They resisted shapelessness with record. That is what archives do at their most serious. They protect against forgetting. Mesopotamia protected against forgetting on a civilizational scale. So, when the modern conservator stands in the climate-controlled vault and handles an amulet of Pazuzu or an incantation against Lamashtu, the distance between artifact and instruction can narrow for a moment. Only a moment. Scholarship returns. Skepticism returns. The museum returns. But in that brief narrowing, the archive reveals its original force. It was not made to amuse the future. It was made to equip it. And if that is true, then the final question is no longer why the tablets were written. The final question is what it means that they survived unread for centuries, then opened again, and now sit before us with their warnings intact. The tablets remained even when no one could read them. That fact has its own strange gravity. For 16 centuries, cuneiform fell silent. The archive endured materially while becoming useless functionally. Clay survived, meaning did not. The names were still pressed into the tablets, but the names could not be spoken properly. The procedures remained, but no one could perform them from the texts because the texts had become closed doors. And then, in the 19th century, the doors opened again. Decipherment is usually told as triumph of scholarship, and it was. But in the context of this archive, decipherment also meant something else. It meant the first literate civilization on Earth began speaking again about what it feared. And what it feared repeatedly, systematically, obsessively, was not only famine, war, and kingship. It was beings, powers, agencies, threats that moved through birth, disease, weather, death, wilderness, ambition, hidden malice, and the foundations of the world itself. Pazuzu, Lamashtu, Humbaba, Anzu, Asag, Tiamat, Ereshkigal, Namtar, Kur, the witch in the night, the 7 sages whose gifts were dangerous because they worked. The archive does not ask us to believe. It does something more difficult. It asks us to notice the seriousness with which belief was organized. It asks us to confront a civilization that did not speak about these matters as though they were decorative stories. It asks us to sit inside an ancient worldview long enough to feel how coherent it was from within. Again, this is the point that should not be compressed. The Mesopotamians did not merely imagine threats. They classified them. They did not merely fear them. They developed protocols. They did not merely tell stories about them. They stored those stories alongside operating procedures, healing texts, exorcisms, amulets, and ritual technologies. The whole system hangs together too tightly to dismiss without residue. That residue is where the unease lives. Because one can explain the archive naturalistically and still not quite dissolve it. One can say Lamashtu is infant mortality, personified Namtar, is fatal disease conceptualized. Pazuzu is a protective inversion born from desperate household magic. Tiamat is chaos, mythologized. Humbaba is ecological taboo, dramatized. Anzu is political theory encoded in divine narrative. One can say all of that, and none of it is foolish. All of it may be true, in part. But even then, the archive remains as evidence of how human beings actually lived inside those explanations. How they acted, what they made, what they copied, what they refused to let disappear. And that practical refusal to forget is itself a fact stronger than interpretation. Suppose the rituals did not work materially, they still worked socially, emotionally, structurally, giving form to fear and agency to the endangered. Suppose the rituals did work in ways we would not measure the same way. The archive would look almost identical. That is the problem. The tablets preserve procedure, but they do not preserve experimental certainty in modern terms. They preserve confidence, repetition, continuity. And continuity can be persuasive in ways scholarship is trained to resist. 3,000 years is a long time to keep copying instructions you believe useless. 3,000 years is a long time to preserve the same hostile names, the same iconographic details, the same ritual distinctions, unless the distinctions mattered. So, the modern mind stands between two temptations. One is credulity, the other is contempt. The tablets deserve neither. They deserve something harder, sustained attention. Attention to the possibility that mythology may be an insufficient word for what these records were doing. Attention to the possibility that ancient people often preserved practical knowledge informs later readers' downgrade because the ontology has changed. Attention to the fact that fear, once organized into archive, becomes one of the clearest mirrors a civilization leaves behind. And what does this mirror show? It shows a people who believed reality was crowded. Not empty matter, not accidental misfortune, but crowded. Filled with powers that had names, jurisdictions, enemies, procedures, and histories. It shows a people who believed survival depended on knowledge. Not vague reverence, not optimistic faith, knowledge. Which being is this? Which words apply? Which ritual opposes it? Which image repels it? Which god once defeated it? Which demon hates it? Which substitute satisfies it? Which diagnosis fits? Knowledge preserved in clay. That is why the script returns in the end to the conservator and the vault. Because the vault is only the latest form of the archive's long patience. Climate control where once there was temple storage. Catalog numbers where once there were shelf orders, museum gloves where once there were scribal hands. The setting changes. The function in one sense does not. The tablets are still being kept against loss. The climate system hums. The drawer closes. Darkness returns around the clay. And somewhere inside that darkness, the old distinctions remain intact. The guardian, who may not have been a monster. The thief of destiny, who proved authority could be breached. The stone demon, whose defeat became infrastructure. The primordial mother, whose corpse became the world. The queen of death, who could not be escaped because she was also necessary. The child killer. The plague king. The cutter of fate. The serpent below. The burning of the witch. The sages, whose wisdom built civilization and endangered it at once. The tablets remember all of them. Whether anything else remembers in the same way is harder to say. Whether these beings were psychological, symbolic, theological, or real in some more literal sense, the archive does not finally decide. It only preserves names, preserves methods, preserves the unsettling possibility that a civilization may have believed itself surrounded for reasons it considered practical, not poetic. And perhaps that is the last return, the last loop the script must not rush past. The Mesopotamians thought these things were worth writing down. They thought they were worth preserving. They thought the difference between remembering and forgetting mattered. The tablets remain. Make of that what you will.